No one is coming to applaud you. That is not a tragedy. That is your release papers. Strip away the audience and watch what happens to a man's spine. Some men grow taller. They were building for themselves the whole time, and the room was never the point. Others collapse the instant the eyes leave, because it turns out the eyes were the entire structure. They weren't disciplined. They were watched. There's a difference between the two so vast it will determine everything you become, and almost no one teaches it, because almost no one survives long enough alone to learn it. Here is the psychology beneath the performance. Human beings are wired for an audience. For most of history, being seen by the tribe meant survival, status, protection, a place at the fire. So we built an internal camera that never turns off. It films our workouts, our work ethic, our restraint at the dinner table, our patience with a difficult person. And most of us, without ever choosing to, have been performing for that camera instead of living by standard. The tragedy isn't vanity. The tragedy is that it makes your character conditional. Remove the lens, and the character disappears with it. The paradigm shift is this. Discipline that requires witnesses isn't discipline. It's marketing. Real transformation is built in the room with no camera, no crowd, no comment section. The empty room is not the absence of accountability. It is the presence of the only accountability that has ever mattered, the one between you and the version of yourself you claim to be building. Every rep you do unseen, every temptation you decline in private, every promise you keep to no one but yourself is a deposit into an account that can never be audited by anyone but you. That account is called character, and unlike reputation, it cannot be given to you by a crowd, and it cannot be taken from you by one either. So here is the system. Begin using it today, not someday. 1. The empty room audit. For 1 full week, notice every action you soften, skip, or perform differently because someone might see it. Write it down at night. Not to shame yourself, but to map the exact size of your dependency on an audience. 2. The witness test. Before any action of consequence, ask, would I still do this exact thing at this exact quality if I knew with total certainty that no one would ever find out? If the honest answer is no, you have found a place where your identity is still rented, not owned. 3. The unseen ritual. Build 1 discipline per week performed with 0 possibility of external recognition. Train before anyone wakes. Finish the section no one asked for. Tell no one. 4. The redirect. When you catch yourself performing, don't punish it. Redirect it. Ask, what would this look like if I were doing it purely for the craft? Then do that version, mid-action. This is the man or woman the rest of this book will build. Someone whose standard doesn't fluctuate with the size of the room. Picture that version of yourself. The one who trains at 5 a.m. in a city still asleep, who tells the truth when a lie would be easier and undetectable, who finishes the work at a level no client will ever notice because the noticing was never the reason. That person doesn't need the room. They built the empty one first, and everything since has just been architecture. Go build yours. Chapter 2. The currency of kept promises. Every promise you break to yourself is a small assassination. You are the murderer and the corpse. You have never once lost trust in yourself over a single catastrophic failure. It happened in installments. The alarm you silenced instead of answering, the page you didn't write, the version of yourself you swore to become on a Sunday night and abandoned by Tuesday. None of these felt like betrayals in the moment. That's exactly why they worked. Betrayal that doesn't announce itself is the most efficient kind because you never rise to defend against it. Your brain does not distinguish between a promise made to your business partner and a promise made to yourself in the dark. Both get logged in the same ledger of evidence your nervous system uses to decide one question. Is this person's word reliable? When the answer trends toward no, something worse than low motivation sets in low self-trust. And low self-trust doesn't just weaken your effort. It weakens your right to expect anything of yourself at all, because some quiet part of you has already reviewed the evidence and ruled against you. The paradigm shift. Confidence is not a mood you wait to feel. It is a ledger you actively balance. You don't need a bigger goal. You need a cleaner record of vows kept to the one person who was in the room for every single one of them. You. 1. The vow audit. List the last 10 promises you made to yourself. Mark each kept or broken, without commentary. This is data, not a trial. 2. The minimum viable promise. Shrink every commitment until failure is nearly impossible. Not an hour of training, one push-up. The size of the promise matters less than the unbroken streak of keeping it. 3. The non-negotiable line. Choose one daily action that never gets skipped regardless of mood, weather, or circumstance. This single unbroken thread becomes physical proof of who you are. 4. The repair ritual. When you break a promise, don't spiral into self-punishment. That just adds a second broken promise to the pile. Within the hour, make and keep a smaller one. Trust is rebuilt in minutes, not months, if you move fast enough. Somewhere ahead of you is a version of yourself who no longer needs external validation, because internal validation became a settled fact years ago. That person doesn't wonder if they'll follow through. The ledger already proved it, thousands of entries deep. Start the entry today. Chapter 3. Comfort is a debt collector. Comfort never asks for payment up front. It just quietly compounds the interest until the day it comes to collect everything at once. Comfort feels like safety because your nervous system was built to interpret the absence of danger as the presence of good news. But comfort and safety are not the same transaction. Safety protects you from a threat. Comfort merely postpones one, the threat of becoming someone who never tested their own limits, never built the capacity the future will demand, never found out what they were actually capable of carrying. Every time you choose the easier option, the workout skipped, the hard conversation avoided, the deadline pushed because pushing it felt survivable, you are not making a neutral choice. You are taking out a loan against a future version of yourself who will have to pay it back with interest, usually at the worst possible moment, usually when the stakes are highest and the runway to prepare is gone. The paradigm shift. Comfort is not the reward for hard work. Comfort is the debt collector disguised as a reward, and it always eventually knocks. Discomfort chosen voluntarily, on your own terms, in small controlled doses, is the only way to pay that debt down before it's due. 1. The discomfort inventory. List what you've been avoiding: a conversation, a workout, a decision, a truth. Naming it removes its camouflage. 2. The voluntary hardship practice. Introduce one small, deliberate discomfort into each day: a cold shower, an early wake, a hard rep you don't want to do. You are training your tolerance for difficulty on your own schedule, not life's. 3. The 2-minute threshold. Resistance is highest in the first 2 minutes of any hard task. Commit only to those 2 minutes. The debt collector is almost always defeated before minute 3. 4. Reframe discomfort as tuition. Every hard thing you do voluntarily is tuition paid toward a capability you'll need later. You are not suffering. You are enrolling. Picture the version of you who no longer flinches at difficulty, because difficulty stopped being a surprise and became a subject you'd already studied. That person doesn't fear the collector anymore. The debt was paid in advance, on purpose, one voluntary rep at a time. Chapter 4. The last excuse you'll ever need. An excuse is a small, well-crafted alibi you write for a crime only you will ever be charged with. Excuses are not laziness. They're a highly sophisticated psychological defense system, engineered to protect your ego from the far more painful alternative: full ownership. Blaming the traffic, the economy, the unsupportive family, the wrong timing, all of it feels better in the short term than admitting you had a choice and didn't take it. The brain will always prefer a comfortable lie over an uncomfortable truth, because the lie costs nothing today. The truth costs your excuses, but it buys back your power. Here's what almost nobody says out loud. Every excuse you've ever used was, at some level, accurate. The traffic was real. The unsupportive family is real. But accuracy is not the same as usefulness. And an excuse, however true, is a story engineered to end with you having no power to change the outcome. That is the actual damage, not the dishonesty, the surrender. The paradigm shift. Ownership is not blame. Blame looks backward and punishes. Ownership looks forward and asks one ruthless question: what part of this was inside my control? And what am I going to do about it starting now? 1. The excuse journal for 7 days. Write down every excuse you make, however small. Patterns will surface fast. 2. The ownership rewrite. Rewrite each excuse as a sentence beginning with "I chose to," not to shame yourself, but to relocate the power back where it belongs. 3. The 24-hour responsibility rule. Within a day of any setback, identify one specific thing you controlled in the outcome. There's always at least one. 4. The kill list. Identify your most recurring excuse and eliminate its root cause structurally. Remove the phone from the room. Prep the gym bag the night before. Delete the app. Environment beats willpower every time. The version of you on the other side of this chapter doesn't need excuses because they've already removed most of the situations that used to require them. What's left is just the work done by someone who ran out of alibis and found they didn't need any. Chapter 5. The discipline of solitude. Noise is where your identity gets borrowed. Silence is where it finally gets authored. Modern life is engineered to make sure you are never alone with your own mind for more than a few unguarded seconds. Every idle moment gets filled, a feed, a notification, a voice that isn't yours. This isn't an accident of convenience. It is the removal of the one condition every serious thinker, builder, and leader in history has required to become who they were: uninterrupted contact with their own thoughts. The fear of solitude is rarely admitted, but it runs deep. Alone, without input, you are forced to hear your actual priorities, your actual doubts, your actual unfinished business, not the curated version performed for others, and not the numbed version drowned out by content. Most people avoid silence not because it's boring, but because it's honest, and honesty at that volume is uncomfortable for anyone who has been avoiding themselves. The paradigm shift: solitude isn't empty time. It's the only unmonitored laboratory you'll ever have. Everything built in noise is, to some degree, built in response to noise. Everything built in silence is built in response to truth. 1. The daily silence block. Reserve 20 device-free minutes a day with no input. No music, no scrolling, no podcast. Just you in the room. 2. The unwitnessed hour. Once a week, spend a full hour in total solitude, thinking, planning, or working without consuming anything produced by someone else. 3. The digital fast. Choose one day a week to remove non-essential digital input entirely. Notice what surfaces in the quiet. 4. Confrontational journaling. Write not to record your day, but to interrogate it. What did I avoid today and why? Somewhere ahead is a version of you who no longer needs noise to feel safe in their own company, because they've already met themselves in the quiet and found someone worth trusting. That meeting only happens once you stop scheduling around it. Chapter 6. Small fires, long nights. Nobody drowns in a single drop. They drown in the 10,000 they never counted. The brain is a terrible accountant when it comes to compounding. It can see a dramatic leap and get excited. It cannot see a 1% shift repeated for 300 consecutive days, because on any given day, that 1% looks like nothing worth noticing. This is precisely why most transformation efforts collapse. They're built for a highlight reel, not for the invisible, unglamorous middle where actual change is manufactured. You have almost certainly overestimated what a single extraordinary day can do for you, and underestimated what an ordinary day, repeated without exception, eventually builds. This isn't a lack of ambition. It's a miscalibrated sense of time. Compounding doesn't reward intensity. It rewards a refusal to stop. The paradigm shift: you don't need a bigger action. You need a smaller one that survives contact with a bad day. The goal was never the sprint. It was the fire that doesn't go out. 1. The 1% rule. Identify the smallest possible version of the habit you actually want. Make it embarrassingly easy to complete. 2. Habit stacking. Attach the new action to something you already do without fail. Right after coffee. Right before you sit down at your desk. 3. The streak tracker. Track the unbroken chain visually. The rule is simple: never miss twice in a row. 4. The weekly review cycle. Once a week, audit what worked and adjust the size of the habit, never the existence of it. Picture yourself a year from this page, having never once needed a dramatic comeback because there was never a total collapse to come back from, just a small fire, tended daily, that quietly became impossible to extinguish. Chapter 7. Fear is just unprocessed information. Fear was never trying to stop you. It was trying to brief you. You just never stayed in a room long enough to hear the report. Fear evolved to keep you alive in a world of physical predators, not in a world of hard conversations, career pivots, and public failure. But the alarm system never got the memo that the threats changed. It still fires at full volume for a rejected pitch the same way it once fired for a genuine physical danger. The result is a chronic misfiring, real fear chemistry attached to survivable, often growth-adjacent situations. Every time you avoid the source of fear instead of examining it, you teach your nervous system that the avoidance worked, reinforcing the exact response you're trying to outgrow. Fear that is never interrogated only grows more confident in its own alarm. Fear that is questioned, even once, starts to lose its authority. The paradigm shift. Fear is not a stop sign. It is a flashing marker pointing directly at the edge of your current capability. Where the fear is loudest is usually where the most useful growth is waiting. 1. The fear inventory. List what you're currently avoiding out of fear, name specifically rather than vaguely. 2. The interrogation. For each fear, ask, what is the actual worst realistic outcome? And could I survive it? Write the honest answer. 3. Micro-exposure. Approach the fear in small, repeated doses rather than one dramatic confrontation. Confidence is built through repetition, not heroics. 4. The cost of inaction ledger. Write out what staying exactly where you will cost you in 1 year if the fear continues to win by default. The version of you who has done this work doesn't become fearless. That person doesn't exist. They simply stop mistaking the alarm for the verdict. They hear the fear, take the information, and move anyway. That's not the absence of fear. That's mastery of it. Chapter 8. The standard doesn't negotiate. A goal asks how you feel today. A standard doesn't care. Goals are seductive because they're finite and dramatic. Hit the number, cross the finish line, feel the surge. But goals are also fragile because they depend on circumstances staying favorable long enough for you to reach them. The moment motivation dips or life intervenes, a purely goal-driven person stalls because the goal was never designed to survive a bad week. A standard operates on entirely different machinery. It isn't asking whether you feel like showing up. It has already decided the answer before the day started. This is the quiet difference between people who look disciplined during good seasons and people who remain unmistakably themselves during terrible ones. The second group installed a standard instead of chasing a goal. The paradigm shift. Stop asking what you want to achieve. Start deciding who you refuse to stop being, regardless of outcome. Standards don't move when results are slow. That's precisely what makes them powerful. 1. Define your non-negotiables. Choose 3 to 5 standards across key areas of your life. Not outcomes, but behaviors you will not abandon regardless of results. 2. The mood independence test. For each standard, ask, would I still meet this on my worst day? If not, it's still a goal wearing a standard's clothing. 3. The standard versus goal audit. Review your current commitments and separate which are true standards and which are conditional goals disguised as discipline. 4. The internal contract. Write your standards down as a private agreement with yourself. Not for display, not for accountability partners, but as the empty room version of a signed vow. What waits on the other side of this chapter is a person whose behavior no longer swings with the weather of their own emotions. Someone whose word to themselves has become as fixed and dependable as gravity. That person isn't chasing anything anymore. They're simply being who they already decided to be. Chapter 9. The weight you choose versus the weight you're given. Life will hand you weight either way. The only real decision is which kind you carry. There are 2 categories of pain available to every person alive: the pain of discipline and the pain of regret. Discipline's pain is sharp, immediate, and finite. It ends the moment the rep, the conversation, or the hard decision is over. Regret's pain is dull, chronic, and has no natural conclusion. It simply accumulates in the background of a life that avoided the first kind too many times. The brain, left to its own devices, will always vote for the smaller pain today, even when it guarantees the larger pain later. This is not a character flaw. It's a design feature built for short-term survival, not long-term architecture. Left unchecked, this bias quietly steers an entire life toward the comfortable pain that compounds instead of the hard pain that resolves. The paradigm shift: stop asking whether something will hurt. It will, one way or another. Ask instead which hurt actually ends, and which one just keeps billing you. 1. The two pains audit for current avoidance. Write out honestly what the pain of doing it costs versus what the pain of continuing to avoid it will eventually cost. 2. Chosen suffering practice. Set one voluntarily difficult goal this month, physical, professional, or relational, and complete it on your terms, not under crisis. 3. The 5-year regret visualization. Picture yourself 5 years from now having avoided this again. Sit in that image until it's uncomfortable enough to move you. 4. The weight room mentality. Treat difficulty as a rep, not an injustice. The weight isn't happening to you. It's what you're there to lift. The person on the other side of this practice has stopped negotiating with pain because they've finally seen both invoices side by side and chosen the one that clears. They carry weight daily on purpose, and it has made them nearly impossible to break by accident. Chapter 10. Playing the long game in a culture of instant everything. Patience isn't passive anymore. In a world engineered for speed, it's the sharpest weapon left standing. Every system around you, feeds, notifications, next-day delivery, instant replies, has been built to reward the shortest possible time horizon. This isn't neutral technology. It is a slow, continuous rewiring of your capacity to tolerate delay, and it is working on almost everyone. The unintended consequence is that boredom tolerance and long-range thinking, once common, have become rare enough to function as a genuine competitive advantage. Most people don't fail at long-term goals because the goals are wrong. They fail because they were never trained to survive the middle, the long, unglamorous stretch with no immediate feedback, where dopamine culture has convinced them something must be broken simply because nothing spectacular is happening yet. Nothing is broken. That silence is what building actually feels like. The paradigm shift. The modern edge doesn't belong to the smartest person in the room. It belongs to whoever can outweigh everyone else without needing proof along the way. 1. The time horizon audit. Review your current decisions and sort them by whether they're optimized for the next hour or the next decade. 2. The 10-year filter before a major decision. Ask if it will still matter in 10 years. Let that answer outrank how urgent it feels today. 3. The delay practice. Deliberately postpone a reaction or a purchase for 24 hours. Notice how much of the original urgency survives the wait. 4. The legacy metric. Redefine your personal measure of progress on a multi-year timescale, not a daily one. Judge the decade, not the Tuesday. The version of you who internalizes this chapter stops needing daily proof that the work is paying off because they've made peace with a longer feedback loop than everyone else is willing to tolerate. That patience, compounded quietly for years, will eventually look to outsiders like an overnight result. You'll know better. Chapter 11. Becoming ungovernable. Ungovernable doesn't mean lawless. It means no one outside you holds the pen anymore. Every person who has never built an internal system of governance spends their life being ruled by something external instead. A mood, a crowd's opinion, a notification, a fear, an old excuse dressed up as circumstance. This isn't freedom. It's outsourced government, and most people never notice they've been living under it because the rulers keep rotating and none of them ever announce themselves. Freedom was never the absence of structure. It's the presence of a structure you authored yourself, applied so consistently that it eventually looks from the outside like ease. The most disciplined people alive don't appear to be straining against constant resistance. They appear calm because the war for self-governance was already won in private, long before anyone was watching. This is the paradigm this entire book has been building toward. The empty room was never a test of willpower. It was the training ground for self-government. Every kept promise, every voluntary discomfort, every fear interrogated instead of obeyed, every standard held on a bad day, all of it was constitutional law being written, one unwitnessed clause at a time. 1. The Self-Governance Charter. Write your own short constitution, the non-negotiable standards, values, and commitments that will govern you regardless of who is present or what mood arrives that day. 2. Audit your external rulers. Identify what currently controls your reactions, a platform, a person's opinion, an old fear. Reclaim authority over one per week. 3. Install the empty room as default. Make the practices from this book, the witness test, the unseen ritual, the repair ritual, permanent operating procedure, not a phase. 4. The legacy declaration. Write a letter to your future self describing, in specific detail, the person this work has built. Reread it on the days the old rulers try to reclaim the throne. What waits at the end of this book is not a louder version of you. It's a quieter, more sovereign one, someone who no longer performs discipline for a crowd because the crowd stopped being the audience that mattered years ago. The room was always empty. It was never the problem. It was the proof. Conclusion and recommendations. 11 chapters ago, this book made you a quiet promise that the person you become when no one is watching is the only version of you that was ever real. Everything since has been the architecture of that promise, dismantling the parts of your character that only activated under observation and replacing them with standards, systems, and self-trust sturdy enough to hold in total silence. You have walked through the myth of the watching world, the currency of kept promises, the true cost of comfort, the death of the excuse, the discipline of solitude, the compounding power of small, unwitnessed actions, the reinterpretation of fear as information, the difference between a goal and a standard, the choice between two kinds of pain, the advantage of patience in an impatient world, and finally, the construction of a self-governed life that no longer needs external permission to operate at full strength. None of this was designed to be read once and admired. It was designed to be used, revisited, and reinstalled whenever the noise of the crowded world starts to convince you that the empty room doesn't count. It always counts. It is, in fact, the only room that ever has. Recommendations for carrying this work forward. 1. Reread with a pen. Return to this book quarterly, not to consume it again, but to audit which chapters have quietly slipped back into performance mode. Something always does. 2. Keep the empty room journal. Continue the Chapter 1 audit as a permanent practice, a running record of actions taken and standards held, with no witness but you. 3. Choose one chapter to master before moving to the next. This book was written to be worked, not skimmed. Full mastery of one system will outperform partial exposure to 11. 4. Return to your self-governance charter monthly. Update it as you grow. A constitution that never changes was written by someone who stopped growing. You were never actually building a book-shaped habit. You were building a person capable of holding their own standard with no one else in the room to enforce it. That person doesn't need applause, deadlines borrowed from someone else's expectations, or an audience to summon their best effort. They already decided who they are. The door is closed. The room is empty. Begin.